You're listening to an Anazao Ministries podcast. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Systematic Geekology. We're going live. Is Indiana Jones more than just a man of the past? Who are the Super Skrulls? And is it better to remember our pain or to leave it all behind? We are the Priesthood of Geeks, and I am joined by two awesome guests today for another What's News episode. I'm here with Kevin Schaefer. He's been on the show before, and we're also here with the only Adam Bear. You guys want to say anything about what else you guys do, what other podcasts you're on or anything real quick?
Sure. Well, I'm glad to be back, Josh. Thanks for the intro. I am Kevin Schaefer. I'm writer, podcaster, geek-related. I co-hosted The Joy of Geek for a long time, and my friend Rich Lepore still hosts The Joy of Gaming, so you can check that out. I also created the Wednesday Lounge podcast, which we haven't recorded in a while, but you can still find us on Spotify and iTunes and all that. And then, I work a lot in the rare disease space, and I host podcasts there. So kind of all over, but big pop culture nut. So you'll see me at Comic-Cons in the North Carolina area.
Nice. All right, Adam, what about you?
Well, I'm pretty new to the whole podcast scene. I want to do more of it. I'm really just a student of nerdism and nerd-based things, and I do a lot of nerd criticism. I'm also I've done stand-up comedy and things like that, and I'm training to be a pastor right now. So I like to merge those two worlds of Christian beliefs and nerdism. I'm pretty new to the scene, but I'm excited. A couple of chances I've got to be on the podcast with you all, and I'm looking forward to doing more when the chances come up.
Yeah, awesome. Do you mind if I ask, where are you planning on? You said you're training to be pastor. What church is that with?
Well, no one right now. I'm just studying. I have an undergraduate degree, and I felt the calling a couple years ago to become a pastor, to study ministry. So I've been studying. I've had some opportunities to preach and be in front of people, and I kind of decided to stop doing stand-up to focus on doing more preaching. So that's kind of a fun transition.
Nice. Awesome. Well, we'll talk about something we've been geeking out on recently, but that's sort of what the whole episode is. So instead, we're going to be talking about Star Trek Strange New World Season 2. We're going to talk about Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny, and just Indiana Jones in general, because why not? We all love Indiana Jones. And then also, we'll be discussing, of course, Marvel's Secret Invasion. We're 4 episodes in right now as of the recording of this. We're going to go back when it's done. Ryan Doze from Across the Bifrost is going to join us to do kind of a review at the end, but we're going to catch you up on what we're thinking so far. But before we do that, we're going to do our lightning round, where we just talk about things that aren't the 3 main topics that we picked for the day and just some other stuff that we're geeking out on. I'll go ahead and start. One thing I've been really into is I always love Hellboy. Everybody knows Hellboy. That's like my prime, favorite comic series, really. But right now, Hellboy in the BPRD, 1957, Fearful Symmetry, just came out last month. Is going to be doing another one, I think, this month. I'm just really excited they got it back. I liked the Hellboy in Love series, little mini series they did, but I'm thankful to be back to some of the just classic Hellboy on some paranormal adventure kind of detective work stuff. So fun for me. Kevin, do you have anything you want to mention that's not in our main 3 today?
Well, it's funny you mentioned that because I haven't read it yet, but I picked up at Barnes & Noble a few months ago when the one near my house was clearing out because they just moved locations. But it's Hellboy in the BPRD. I'm trying to look at the title over there. I think it's 1956, but he's got a cool hat on and stuff. But I just picked up because it looked cool, and I've read a lot of the original Hellboy. Also one of my favorites, but I will read that soon. But I wanted to quickly talk about My Adventures with Superman, which just dropped on Max on Friday. It is delightful. For those of you who don't, it kind of fell through. Well, it got announced a while ago, and then I hadn't heard about it. But it's a new animated series on Max, and it features Clark, Lois, and Jimmy Olsen, college age, young adult. They're all interns at the Daily Planet. It has a very anime influence to it. It's not anime, but sort of in the same way that like Avatar: Last Airbender is not an anime show, but derives much of its influence from that. You can see the aesthetic there. It also reminds me a lot of the comic Superman Smashes the Klan, which is one of my favorites. Yes, just aesthetically and tone wise, it very much is like that. Even though it's set in modern day, it's just got a really good feel. So the first 2 episodes dropped on Friday. I loved them. Looking for that weekly. The only big name really that I know on that is Jack Quaid voices Superman. And the rest of the cast is really good so far. It's got some interesting villains lined up, but it's doing both kind of the younger Superman and origin, but not like heavy-handed. So I like it. It's a lot of fun. Yeah,
I have to check that one out. I never really liked Superman until like the last couple of years, and then some of the newer comics, just kind of seeing his family life, actually kind of got me intrigued. I'm like, okay, let's see what's going on with this guy. Adam, what's going on, man? Anything you've been really getting into recently?
Yeah, I've been geeking out on Invincible. I picked it up randomly. Yeah, I've really liked the comic book, and I really want to do like an in-depth study between the differences between the comic book and the TV show. Because even though they're the same story, there were really interesting choices that they made between the two of them. You know, why they did some things, why they didn't do some things. And there's a really cool, fun discussion to have. And I'm thinking about, I really want to do that, but I've really enjoyed the comic book. I enjoyed how much, I thought it was going to be, it's a pretty R-rated comic book, but it's not like a hard R. It's a really soft R. And I like that. I like that there isn't overtly, sexual themes in it, but they're very realistic relationships. And I've just been really psyched into it and really enjoying it. I think I read like half of the book series in like a couple of days. And I'm like, well, I got to take a couple weeks off and then I'll read the other half, because there's like 150 of them in the original run. So, yeah, I've been really geeking out about them.
That's what I was like when I first found the Ice Cream Man comics. Man, Ice Cream Man's wild. But yeah, no, Kirkman does an awesome job with those comics. And we got a few people on our show that wants to talk about the Invincible show and comics. So,
wow, yeah, I'm deep in the middle of it.
Yeah,
deep in the middle of it.
As far as other things for the lightning round, there's a lot of shows coming up I'm excited for. Like if we didn't have so many things that just came out to talk about, we probably would have picked one of these for the main ones. Good Omen season 2 is coming up. I loved season 1. Anything David Tennant's in, really, I love. So there's that.
Yeah.
But it's heaven and hell. What do we really define as evil? Angels, demons, all the good stuff. I enjoy all that kind of stuff. Futurama season 11 is finally arriving thanks to Hulu. Or, we should wait till it comes out to decide if I want to say thanks or thanks, Hulu. But it's coming out. I'm excited. I love Futurama. I'm glad they got Bender back, so that's good. And of course, One Piece. I am begrudgingly excited for the live action One Piece coming to Netflix next month. Live action animes usually don't turn out great, but they built the entire ships for some of these sets. They casted really well. I know they're putting a lot into it, so I'm very cautiously excited. Either of you guys have anything else for the lightning round? Kevin?
It's summer blockbuster season, so really excited for Mission Impossible this week. Like, I just showed my dad Mission Impossible Fallout the other day, because he hadn't seen any of them. I'm like, let me just show you the best one here, because like that is a series that oddly enough gets progressively better. Most franchises usually the other way around, but I'm really stoked for that. Other than that, since they announced, I could go on a like whole tangent about DC right now, but since they announced that the Batman movie is going to be Bruce and Damian and like heavily based on the Grant Morrison run, I've been going back rereading the Grant Morrison Batman and Robin run, which is still fantastic all these years later. I had read it probably a few years ago on DC Universe, and then started picking up, going back collecting the old trades. That is just a wonderful run that still has a prominent influence, and I'm really excited to eventually see like that version of Robin on the big screen.
Oh yeah, no, that's gonna be good. All right, Adam, did you have anything else for the lightning round?
No, I'm just excited to get into the topics.
Oh yeah. We have some great topics coming up. Speaking of which, first thing up I want to talk about is Star Trek Strange New Worlds. We're in season 2 right now. I think we're 3 or 4 episodes into that. I think we're 4 episodes of that and 3 episodes into Secret Invasion. Sorry, I've been watching them both like side by side because one's Wednesday, one's Thursday. Hard to keep up. I'm really, really loving this. Really excited for what they're doing. What are y'all's history when it comes to Star Trek, or even, new Star Trek, as some people call some of the new stuff?
You guys will have more to say on this. So Paramount is one of those streaming services I don't have right now because there's so many.
Yeah, that's fair.
But with Star Trek, so growing up, I was always more of a Star Wars, from the get go. But then when the Abrams movie came out in '09, I wanted to just check out some of it and just kind of see what it was all about and everything. And so I've watched a good bit of the original series, and sort of some of Next Generation, some of Deep Space Nine, kind of random, really. But I know the Abrams movies are much more Star Wars, and
Yeah.
more action heavy. But I did watch all those, and I've seen a lot of the movies too. Of course, love Wrath of Khan, but I've heard nothing but great things about Strange New Worlds. I'm gonna get it's one of those many things on my list that I'm gonna get to, but I just gotta bite the bullet and subscribe to yet another streaming service. But I have heard by far that it's the best of all, and it both combines the sci-fi principles of the Star Trek with also some cool action and cool modern stuff as well. So I do look forward, but feel free to spoil. Do not worry about me. It's like I said, I wish I could say more on this one, but I know, you guys, I think will have more expertise on this matter.
Yeah, and I haven't been a huge Trekkie my whole life. When I was younger, my aunt, who got me into Star Wars, I've always been bigger on Star Wars myself too, but she also made me watch the original Star Trek movies.
Mm-hmm.
And I loved those. Eventually, there was a few different times I always tried to watch Next Gen, and I've never got into it. And that's always shocking to people. But, I'm known as Josh with wrong opinions for a reason. It's fine. It's okay. But when Lower Decks, Star Trek Lower Decks comes out, it's like an adult cartoon, Star Trek universe in canon. It was so good and it was so funny. And some of the jokes, I was I could tell they were making fun of other Star Trek. And I was I need to understand the joke better. So I went back and watched stuff for the sake of the bit,
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And it ended up making me fall in love with some of these other series. Deep Space Nine is really one that I really fell in love with.
Yeah.
I've actually seen it a couple times just in the last year. So it's been pretty great.
Yeah.
Adam, what about you? What's your history with Star Trek in general?
Well, let's see here. My dad's a huge nerd, and he handed that down, and we were pretty steep, probably a lot more into Star Trek than we would have Star Wars. I always loved the concept of these big naval-like ships fighting in space. I always loved that idea, and I've seen all of the original series, and I've seen a huge portion of Next Generation. I've seen a little bit of Star Trek Voyager, but Deep Space Nine was really my jam. It still is my jam. I think it's probably one of the best Star Trek series out there. A lot of the alien lores of things, most of what we know about Ferengis and Klingons, a lot of that comes from Deep Space Nine, or it expanded upon Deep Space Nine. The acting in it is just top notch. I'm a theater person, so acting performances and what actors bring to these stories is so important to me, and I love to analyze it and comment on it. And just some of the acting in Deep Space Nine is just unbelievable. Now, that's not to say there isn't some great acting from the original, from all of the series. There is, but I was thinking about it today. What makes Deep Space Nine so interesting is, it's the diversity of storytelling. When you have the original, when you have Star Trek and Next Generation, it's this same crew kind of going into strange new worlds, strange new environments, versus Deep Space Nine. It's creating stories from this stable environment. And so you have a cop episode where they're trying to figure out a murder on the station, and then you have political warfare, and there's all these just different layers, and it's two very different stories in the same universe, which is so cool to me. But I've been really into the movies. I was able to see I didn't get to see Undiscovered Country in theaters because I was just a little bit too young, but I did see Next Generation or Star Trek Generations and on. I've seen all the movies in theaters.
Ooh,
And I love the
nice.
Abrams edition. I thought it was fantastic, well acted, well written. Beyond and the other one, I can't remember its name off the top of my head. They were okay. They were a little bit Into Darkness.
Yeah.
Yeah, Beyond and Into Darkness. They were a little bit lackluster compared to the Abrams one, compared to the original Abrams one. But they were still very good in their own right. They're all very different styles, and I haven't got a chance to get into New World, but I keep hearing good things about it, and I was really worried that the brand was destroyed. But I'm so happy to hear. I've got to see some clips of Picard, and I've really enjoyed what I've seen from Picard, and I'm really excited to hear that people are excited about Strange New World.
Yeah, I love Strange New Worlds. When it comes to the J.J. Abrams movies, I thought the first two were really done really well. The first one, then Into the Darkness, I thought it was really good. The problem was it's almost like Abrams knew he wanted to do that, the spin at the end, that twist, spoiler alert, where instead of Spock dying, it was Kirk. And it was like, oh, that was awesome. But then it's like he didn't know what to do after that. He knew he wanted to do the twist, but didn't know how he wanted to handle it. And I was like, So I think the execution could have been done better. But we're here to talk about Strange New Worlds Season 2. And man, what a journey it has been so far. It has truly been wild. The characters, great. The plot's great. And really, I swear it was a coincidence, but the three things we picked really we're going to see a little bit of a through line in today's episode when we're talking about these things, because it's a lot of like, how does our history impact us now? And who are we really? Like, what is it that makes me? Kind of ends up being a theme. Without spoiling too much, you have the first episode, you see Spock ends up in a situation, which, that's part of why I love it. Like I mentioned, I was introduced to the original movies first. This one, to me, this show is a lot like what I wish the Star Trek prequels would have been, where we're kind of seeing the history of characters that we loved, and it also has good storytelling instead of garbage storytelling with the characters we love. Sorry.
Yeah.
I know.
I have a fondness for don't worry. I have a fondness for the Abrams movies, and like, I think the biggest highlight of it is the cast is phenomenal, and like, but I don't have ardently defend the storylines in really any of them. They're kind of like, the first one is by far the most fun. Into Darkness, I still think is kind of a mess, and then Beyond, I thought captured that sci-fi nuance a little more. Yeah. But no, you're okay to have those opinions. Don't worry.
No. I like the Abrams Star Trek movies. I just didn't like the Star Wars prequels.
Gotcha.
This prequel, I think is pretty well done. Although it was a little bit easier because you didn't have as much stuff you had to do, but they end up with a situation. Spock gets to be captain for a run. And man, is that interesting, because he's having to go on his gut. And obviously he's Spock. He doesn't know how to do that. So you get some of the amusement out of that. But it is so that they can rescue Lieutenant Anne Noonying Singh. I might be saying it wrong. You guys might need to correct me. But she's a descendant of Khan. For those of you familiar with the Wrath of Khan or Into the Darkness or any of that other, Khan is the big bad of the Star Trek world. And here we have his descendant being a member of this crew.
Oh, that's cool.
And she's stinking awesome. She is amazing. First episode, they have to save her. She's in this world where it's like she's having to act the part of her own race and all that. Not really who she is. She ends up getting rescued. Then in episode 3, big spoiler alert, she ends up in the past and has an opportunity to destroy Khan. And all this baggage she's been carrying her whole life of what her ancestors did, she could stop it. But then that also means she wouldn't exist. Her timeline wouldn't exist. The Starfleet as it is wouldn't exist. The utopia that humanity has created wouldn't exist. But, you're kind of faced with that history of the baggage of your own ancestors and all that. Episode 2, Commander Una, her entire race, they were born on a planet where if they're not genetically modified with machines, then they can't survive on their planet. But and you can't be in Starfleet and be modified in that way. So she gets outed. They have this whole case. I was really happy because it would have been really easy to make it this is actually about racism, or this is actually about transgenderism. But the show kept it about what it was about and let you make your own inferences if you wanted to. So I was glad they did that. They had a whole legal like court episode, like court drama episode. It was awesome. And then in episode 4, literally everybody forgets who they are at one point, and you're having to like rediscover who you are. So all of these episodes kind of getting to this: who are you? How does the past of your, evil ancestor or whatever else, or your race and how you were modified affect who you are now in Starfleet and how you're able to make a difference in the world today? Really cool themes. I like what they're doing. I think for those of you, or Adam, I know you've been more familiar with Star Trek long term. As far as like themes that Star Trek likes to emphasize, is that kind of normal for Star Trek to kind of have an ongoing theme like this for a season? Or
Oh yeah, I mean it's definitely more common in the later Star Trek. I mean, when you look at '90s storytelling, it was very episodic, and that's true of Next Generation. It stayed. There were overarching villains or overarching enemies that may appear throughout the season, and of course there was always the reoccurring character of Q. But it really was Deep Space Nine had the more in depth, like you had the whole Dominion War, you had the Dominion conflict. They actually had their own season of Secret War, pretty much, where they're trying to figure out who are these changelings on Earth. So that's really in line. It's funny that you mentioned a courtroom drama. I immediately went back to a really amazing episode of The Next Generation where a scientist and Picard are debating whether or not Data is real or not, is an actual being or just a thing. And so it really harkens back to that those original kind of debates and original kind of stories of the Next Generation and original series. So I think that's really cool.
Yeah, I haven't seen that episode yet, but I heard a lot about it. And I don't know if you guys know this, but I have been kind of aspiring to get into law myself. I'm really interested in like constitutional law, different stuff like that. So the one episode where they are in the court was really actually quite inspiring to me, especially because at first it seemed like they were going to kind of pull like what a lot of you hear about in some like American politics, if you keep up with Supreme Court stuff, where it's like, oh, well, they're arguing by the letter of the law and what the text actually says. But what we're trying to get to is what's really behind that. We want to accept everyone. And it kind of makes you feel like it's going to be this or that kind of thing, or going to the letter of the law or the thing. And then it turns out that the lady was arguing this whole time, was actually tricking the other side, just showing her exactly what she needed to point to in the law and won it on the letter of the law. So it wasn't even like they didn't even have to do that comparison. And I was like, okay, that kind of switcheroo. I was like, that's cool. It really kind of inspired me on the path I was going. I was like, okay, yeah, I loved it. I thought it was a really, really cool episode. And then it's funny being like more of a Star Wars guy, because I'm used to just being about the action, Star Wars, you're there to watch lightsabers and blasters go off. And this whole episode is just, they were in the court. They're doing a little investigating, kind of figuring out what needs to happen. What were the laws of Starfleet? And somehow it was still fascinating.
Well, and that's what was so intriguing about Next Generation and the original series is it is about Gene Roddenberry had this really idealized concept of humanity, and he wanted to have these discussions and conversations about different themes of the day. His ideas were very progressive for that time period, and so there was a lot of the episodes were dealing with these different issues and dealing with more higher philosophical ideas beyond just the action and the intrigue, but actually having these really discussions. And it's cool to see how that carried on even into Deep Space Nine. And I haven't seen enough of Voyager, but I'm sure it happened in Voyager. So yeah, you can't really compare Star Wars and Star Trek. Star Wars is fantasy and space. Star Trek is idealized science fiction. They're two opposite ends of the science fiction spectrum. And you can't go in thinking you're going to have similar experiences. You got to treat them as what they are.
Yeah. Now, Star Trek Discovery, on the other hand, that's a lot of blast 'em stuff. A lot of action in that one. But that's a whole nother topic. For now, if you guys are good, I'm ready to move on to the next topic, which, of course, is Marvel's Secret Invasion. Current series going on Disney Plus, extremely loosely based on the comics. If you don't know, if you're fans of like ongoing movie adaptations of things, the further you get into things, the further you get from the books. Like it's just how it is. If you change one minor thing, obviously down the road, that's going to keep you from doing some other big thing. Just how it is. Also, production stuff, Secret Invasion in the comics is largely just an Avengers event. They aren't going to have Iron Man, they're not going to pay Robert Downey Jr. to show up for the show. Like, it's fine. It's amazing they got Samuel L. Jackson for it. But so far, what is your guys' history with Marvel, the MCU, and then specifically the Secret Invasion comics? Have you guys read those before?
With MCU, I've been there since the beginning. I mean, I talked about this on the last episode I was on here on the podcast with looking at like the cosmology of the Marvel universe. So been at the MCU from the beginning. And then comics, like I've not read Secret Invasion before. I mean, I know the basics, but I'm more like I like Spider-Man, Daredevil, much of the stuff. Like, so there's a lot of and in terms of like big event crossovers, I've read a lot more DC than Marvel when it comes to those specifically. And then with the show, I've watched the pilot so far. I was traveling in the last week here, so I'm a little behind. But I also, it's at that point. I mean, I know not to like bring up this again of like, are we experiencing any MCU burnout? I'm like, I think finally at that point a little bit, because like I loved Guardians 3, but then Ant-Man was, very mediocre. And then this one, I heard it got better, but the pilot really didn't impress me that much, just because I thought the camera work was kind of all over the place. Had a great cast and an interesting enough premise, but it is also hard for me to get into this concept. I mean, being, some of your favorite characters, they're actually Skrulls. Like, I know that is what the show is built on, but it's, I don't know. For me, the risk with that is you run the gamut of like all this emotional investment you've poured into these characters has actually been fake. And I know, I'm sure there are going to be surprises, I'm sure there are going to be twists and stuff, but that's where I'm like having a little harder time getting into this. But I think the highlight of this show so far is by far the cast. I mean, you have like getting to have Nick Fury front and center, getting to have Ben Mendelsohn with him, Amelia Clark, and then I'm drawing a blank on the actor's name, but the guy who he plays like the main villain, and he was Malcolm X in One Night in Miami, which is a great movie. And so there's a lot to, but I'm curious what you guys' thoughts are. But yeah, so I mean, so to sum it up, like longtime MCU fan, with the comics, I have a little bit of everything, but I've not read Secret Invasion specifically, even though I know the basic premise. And yeah, so a little not crazy on the show. And I also I have to mention this, that I don't know if you guys heard that the intro for this, I cannot forgive Marvel for, they used AI to create the intro here instead of actually hiring artists. And that still infuriates me that that's where we're at right now. Is it's right, like it's one thing to use AI for like tools and stuff, but to use it to create an entire intro sequence rather than hiring great artists to do something better, that that I know that's a whole other discussion, but I had to put that out there.
Yeah, I know there's a lot of people are torn when it comes to everything that involves AI stuff. I don't know. As much as I enjoy the stories with Secret Invasion, I also do have to admit the Skrulls tend to be Marvel's like ultimate cop out.
Yeah.
If people reacted poorly enough to something they did, then all of a sudden, don't worry, that character didn't really do it.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. And I mean, that's not just Secret Invasion. That's been a problem in Marvel comics for a long time.
Right. Right.
Adam, any thoughts? How does your relationship with Marvel, MCU, Secret Invasion, any of that?
Well, I've got all the thoughts. I'm a huge, like I said, my dad was a huge nerd. I didn't read a lot of the comic books growing up, but I was kind of in and out of them as I could. And I was really selective. I didn't read the Secret Invasion thing, but I'm a huge fan of the MCU and the storytelling aspect of it, and how revolutionary, for better or worse, the revolutionary impact the MCU has had on filmmaking. I think the thing that I really like about this series is it's returning to what made the second phase so good of the MCU. The second phase was all about telling superhero stories in different ways. So Captain America, Winter Soldier, was a spy thriller. And to kind of return to that is really cool to me and really interesting. And I agree with you about the AI thing, Kevin. It's I read an interview and I get what they were trying to do. They were trying to make it a parallel to like humanity, and they had this whole logical reasoning. I don't agree with it. Just hire artists.
Yeah.
Don't cop out. You're just being lazy at that point. But I really loved this story so far. The question on my mind: is it too late? Did Phase 4 kill the MCU? Because the problem was the best the best Marvel movie out of Phase 4 was No Way Home, and Disney only got 25% of that. Sony got the rest, and then the second high gross movie since Endgame has been Across the Spider-Verse, which again Sony owns that. Marvel doesn't own that. So as much as I'm really enjoying Secret Invasion, the spy thriller, terrific acting, really interesting story elements. I'm really concerned that it's a little bit too late, that it's already been damaged. And like, I don't think people have superhero fatigue. I think people have bad writing and bad storytelling fatigue. You know what I mean? I think Spider-Man No Way Home, I think especially Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse proves that not only are we okay with the multiverse concept, but we're willing to accept it if there's really good writing and really good acting. Unfortunately, Marvel hasn't really done that. You know what I mean? They haven't really had a lot of this thing. And then any grace they've added, like I really liked WandaVision. I thought it was great. I thought it was really interesting. I don't care that it devolved to a CGI third act Skybeam ending, because I really liked the build up to that and thought it was done well. But then they ruined it with Multiverse of Madness. They ruined the character. They ruined the concept. There's so many easier things they could have done to make it more interesting. And the same is true with Secret Invasion. It's like they needed to have forethought of this. And they needed to have two distinct stories happening in the MCU. The multiverse storyline and the Skrull storyline. Everything in the Skrull storyline should have been, Falcon and the Winter Soldier should have had been a little bit of it, sprinkled a little bit into that, and done some other things, and then you have the multiverse saga, which would then of course be, Loki and WandaVision, and then of course Spider-Man and stuff. So if you have these two different stories, when they come around to doing Kang Dynasty and when they come around to doing Secret Invasion, there would be such a greater payoff. But I feel like they're just kind of been scrambling since Phase 4 to kind of come up with something and do something, and it's just not working out.
And I'd have to agree with you a lot of the. Sorry, Josh. I don't want to wait. Josh, you want to go first? Okay. Well, I just want to say, because like for me, there were a lot of highlights from Phase 4. I'm not one of those people who think like, oh, this killed the MCU. Like, because I mean, obviously No Way Home, but like, I really enjoyed Black Widow. I thought that was like one of the best. Like, I know a lot of people like put that toward the bottom. I thought that was a great spy thriller, and it really captured kind of the more gritty aesthetic, like Winter Soldier. I love WandaVision. I really enjoyed Wakanda Forever. There were big highlights for me. But I think that's really the main. Like when you introduce something like Secret Invasion that should be very interconnected and should be very much like this kind of story that's going to have a big impact, which I think it will, but also not a lot of people are watching it because it's just like another project turned out that because of the kind of like more haphazard nature and like less interconnected storytelling that we've seen lately, I think it does have a problem when you're trying to do a big crossover like this. And so, I'm still a big MCU fan. I still see a lot of everything, but yeah, I think they need to figure something out to where they have the fluidity of everything leading up to Endgame, where it was all this like one big story they were telling and, stories within that, and it all built to something. And here it's becoming a lot more disjointed and unfocused, and that's starting to have a ripple effect now. So I sure hope they can recover, because I'm still going to be in the MCU as long as it goes. Yeah.
I've been Marvel ever since I was a kid. Captain America was like some of the first things I remember reading. The Secret Invasion, when I first started getting back into comics, was right during the Civil War. So Bendis's Secret Invasion was like one of my favorites when I first jumped back in. Big MCU fan from the beginning. And being me with the wrong opinions, I had to push back a little bit and say Phase 4 was one of my favorites. that they've done.
Nice.
Just because I'm a huge Captain America fan. I thought Falcon and the Winter Soldier was top tier Marvel. WandaVision, Loki, Moon Knight, Miss Marvel, they were all fantastic to me. But I think what you're going to see change, and this is like some of like where I really enjoyed the shows in Phase 4, a lot of the movies I thought kind of dropped off. Mm-hmm. That was a big thing of whenever they replaced the CEO again. So Disney's CEO, Bob Chapek, he wanted to focus on Disney Plus. He was making it all about the shows and ignoring a lot of their movies. So not just Marvel, but across the board, a lot of Disney films were failing. You see Bob Iger back, you're still getting some of these things from the end of the Chapek run, but I think we're going to start seeing the movies emphasized again.
Yeah.
I don't know what that's going to look like, but I'm interested to see how Secret Invasion plays a part of this. Is this still part of that Chapek plan? Is this going to start building us into the Iger? I definitely think Secret Invasion is going to have a lot to do with the coming Marvels movie with Miss Marvel, Captain Marvel, and I can't remember the other lady's name.
Monica Rambeau.
Monica Rambeau.
Yeah. And I definitely think it's going to build into the Brave New World movie as well. And possibly the Deadpool. Some of the casting things I've heard made me kind of curious. I don't know. We'll see.
Oh, real quick, did you guys see the Deadpool news today?
Today?
Yeah. Did you see
No, go on.
Oh, well.
Has there just been an update since the costumes?
No, that's what I was going to bring about. Like, about that. They debuted Hugh Jackman in the classic Wolverine costume.
Finally.
I mean, it was I mean, as soon as they said a while ago, Hugh Jackman and Deadpool, I'm like, okay, well, that's where we're going to finally see it. But you can see an image. The image is floating around now, and it does look pretty cool. But,
Nice. Yeah, but so Adam, do you say you have seen up to episode 3 so far?
Yeah, I've been really enjoying it.
Do you want to recap what's been going on so far? Spoiler alert for all, warning. Kevin might want to plug his ears. I don't know.
Right. You're good.
Yeah.
You're good.
Well, I mean, the basic plot's pretty simple. Actually, I joke because there's a real similarity to the plot, at least the introduction plot to this in Captain America, to Falcon and the Winter Soldier, but we won't go there. The basic concept is a villain. The Skrulls have been living on Earth, and have been kind of. Nick Fury thought a small kind of colony was on Earth, but as the story is unfolding, we're realizing that there's more Skrulls on Earth than Nick Fury originally thought. And Nick Fury has basically come out of retirement to try to solve this problem before it gets too far out of hand. And, they're really emphasizing the personal stakes that Nick Fury has in all this. And we're kind of unfolding and unpacking that character more. And that's been really cool. And the first episode was really introduction to everything, introduction to the characters, and introduction to kind of the feel of everything. And then the second episode was kind of just unveiling more of the villain and unveiling more of the concept, and kind of just seeing the fallout from the second episode. And then the third episode is really just kind of diving into the conflict of everything and the tension that's growing, and kind of just they're doing a really good job with this villain. I can't remember his name. It's like Davroth or something like that. I can't remember. The name just flew out of my brain. They're doing a really cool job of creating this character, and you kind of want to be sympathetic of him a little bit, but at the same time, it's like you don't. You know what I mean? He's like, it's obviously he's being very mustache twisting kind of villain, but at the same time, he's still like, you're kind of like you're struggling to feel how you feel about him. And that's kind of a really brief summary of it all, but it's just a really fascinating kind of spy thriller, in the sense that you have these superpowered things and you have Nick Fury, and you're kind of seeing Nick Fury from a new angle. Yeah.
Man. So one of the cool things that they brought up that's going to bring us to talking some about the comics. So the Skrull, just on their own, they take not only your look, can look exactly like you. They also have these devices and stuff, and can fully take on your memory. So, that whole trick that we do of, only Adam would remember that one time that we went to the ice cream place in Charleston. Nope. Skrulls know it too, so you can't do that. Then they have the Super Scroll, which just got introduced in the show. Comics, Super Scroll also get the powers. So they can be Spider-Man. They can be Captain America, etc. That's where it starts getting scary, because then they can be anybody, any power, any memory. You can't trust anyone. So I got really excited when they dropped that term, Super Scroll. I was like, oh, which supers are we going to be, doing with this?
Josh, do you think with that, they'll more kind of tease it in the show and then build that up to like the Avengers movies? Because
I feel like you're going to see more of it in Marvels.
Yeah. Because I can't imagine they'll do too much of that on this series, like since it has so far been more like ground level, agent spice thriller. But I think that would be a cool tease and then to feature in the movies.
Yeah. Now, I've heard rumor though that they're going to use it to show the debut of like one of the X-Men or Fantastic Four or something. Yeah. I doubt that. One of the rumors I find a little bit more believable, Quake from S.H.I.E.L.D. might end up making an appearance on the show. And that would be something that they could do with the Super Scrolls. For those who don't remember, Marvel had the Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. TV show. The first season was in the MCU, and at some point it stopped being in the MCU. We don't really understand how that works, but it worked somehow. And everybody who watched the show is really distraught because some of those characters we really fell in love with and are just gone now, supposedly. But they're saying they could make an appearance in some of these shows. They said that for a long time, and now we're getting a show where it would be really easy to have some of them pop up. So fingers crossed. I'd love to see Daisy, aka Quake. That would be great. She's really cool, great actress. As far as the comic, did you say, Adam, that you read the comic some?
No, I didn't read the comic some. I'm familiar with it. But yeah, I'm familiar with it. I just didn't read it.
Okay. So I loved this. So for those who don't know, the Civil War event had, at the end, Captain America died because he basically submitted to Tony Stark. He won, then he submitted, and Tony Stark turned around and killed him because, as I've been saying for a very long time, Tony Stark is just a bad guy. Anyway.
At least in the comic books.
In the comics, yeah. The movies,
different.
I like the movie version of it so much better. But there's a reason Iron Man's one of my favorite characters in the movies, and then I never read the comics. So.
No, it gets rough. But Secret Invasion starts. Everybody's mourning Captain America. People, just like in the show, it starts off, they're blaming Nick Fury. Where was Nick Fury? He's been missing. This is all his fault kind of deal. Turns out Nick Fury went undercover a long time ago because he realized Earth's been invaded by Skrulls. We can't trust anything. This little silly civil war they're doing doesn't matter. So he's been underground trying to figure all this out. We go through, and it's really interesting to see. They think they figured out who's who, which ones are Skrulls, which ones aren't. This ship lands when the two sides that were part of the Civil War are meeting. They're going to fight it out. And then all of a sudden the ship lands, and a bunch of the heroes that were already there come out of the ship. Turns out some of them were Skrulls, some of them were not. The real Captain America was on that ship. And one of the ways that they knew early on was because who else could have got that ship outside of a Skrull empire? It's like, really, only Cap could have done that. But we're always kind of curious. Is Cap actually a Skrull? We saw him die. You end up learning, which also makes you question Tony Stark, that the Skrulls taught themselves to fully believe that they are who that character is. So they don't even know. They have to they don't know that they're a Skrull. They're that deep undercover kind of deal. And they convinced Tony Stark at one point that he was actually a Skrull. Turned out he wasn't. But he was convinced he might have been. Because you don't even know. You have no way of knowing. Reed Richards, in the end, basically builds a device that shoots people and can reveal if they're a Skrull or not. Kind of a cop-out, in my opinion. One of the big takes away that I did like, though, were some of the Skrulls who really fully took on the identity of who they took over, took it on so well that they kind of learned those values, those principles. One of the Skrulls pretending to be Captain Marvel, and actually turned out that he couldn't kill the Avengers because he took on those principles and he realized that might have been right, that maybe the Kree were right, maybe the humans are right and not the Skrull. If I'm remembering right, one of the Skrulls also tried to be Captain America. Same thing happened. They kind of took on his virtues, principles, and weren't able to be evil anymore. So that was always an interesting thing because you have this on the human side of who's really human, who's really not. And then you have on the Skrull side of some of them are starting to turn good because they took on these heroes' identity. And it really begs the question, both in the show and I would argue also in the comics, what makes us different? Like, is it our values? Is it, your memories? What is it that makes us different from an imposter of us? Like, what is it that identifies me as me? And one of those things is like, sometimes you get really ironic with it, where you see that the scroll better learns the people's principles than that person themselves. And you see, the one time you see it on the show that I thought was really interesting is there's this scene where Nick Fury is sitting with one of the scrolls, and he's talking about him and his mother used to get on the train, and they had to go to the colored train. They couldn't go to, the regular, passengers. And he was talking to this guy, and he's like, we used to play this game. Tell me something I didn't know. At the end of the game, the whole conversation, the scroll begs Fury, and it's basically like, why can't scrolls and human live side by side? And Fury says no. And just that irony of, he started this conversation talking about how him and his mother couldn't be, they were prejudiced, were against them, and they couldn't live side by side with the others. And then he ends the conversation by saying that he refuses to live side by side with the other. So I thought that was really interesting. I know you didn't see it, Kevin, but what do you kind of make of that kind of conversation and some of these ideas of what are our principles and how do they actually stand up when we're talking about people who are different than us?
Well, and I think that's like thematically where it gets really interesting, because on the outside it's just like, oh, who's a scroll, who's not, and but it's those moments that I think elevated to something like what you saw in WandaVision, and I'm glad for you. You liked Falcon Winter Soldier, because that was also a big highlight for me that a lot of people didn't like as much. But I don't know. It's a deep philosophical question to unpack, like what makes us who we are. But it is so worth exploring, and especially I think what makes that so impactful is to have it with one of the most reserved characters in the MCU, who is famously like doesn't tell anyone about who he is, and like even the people who have like worked with him for years hardly know him and hardly know his backstory. And so and anytime you get to see Samuel Jackson dive into that vulnerability, into that emotional depth, it's great. And so that I think is something like that makes it really powerful.
Yeah. Adam, do you have any thoughts as far as like, what is it that identifies us, and what makes us, how does this inform how we treat the other when we think about our own identity?
Well, I think, I take it back to a biblical sense, and I think that God created us with a longing and a sense of needing truth. And I think that the biggest issue with the Skrulls, and I love the comparison, that I love that you brought up that scene, and I'm trying to wrap my brain around what you said, because I think it's a really cool and important thing. Part of what the Skrulls are is they are a lie. They're a false. They don't just be out of they can't just be out in the open. They have to copy or replace people. And I think that Nick Fury understands that part of the issue is, would have humanity accepted the Skrulls, back in the 80s when they first started arriving? Would they have been able to accept or comprehend what they are, or even trust them, knowing that at any moment they could just take over someone's life and take over someone's personality? And that could be. I mean, I think about that from a realistic. That would be kind of terrifying to think that at any moment someone could just come and replace me and just make me disappear, or replace someone that I know and I love. That would be a really scary concept. But I think you make a really interesting point of that conversation, and the whole conversation about the others and stuff. I'm still trying to wrap my brain around it a little bit.
Yeah. As a big Doctor Who fan, that's also why David Tennant said his favorite Doctor Who villains were the Zygons. And he ended up even coming back for the 50th anniversary special just so he could fight the Zygons. And that's kind of Doctor Who's shape-shifting alien, kind of same concept of like, they can just replace you. And it's terrifying because like, what does that do to your family? Like, what could they tell your loved ones that they will always question? Was that you or was that the Skrull? Like, they'll never know for sure, Well,
and it's interesting you bring up Doctor Who, because then in the Peter Capaldi run, I'm also a huge Whovian. In the Peter Capaldi one, when you're having the conversation, we won't even go there. Wonderful one. I love Peter Capaldi. When you're having the conversation of the button, it's kind of when they have the episode where the Zygon and the humans are basically was come down to pressing of a button. It really is the same kind of concept we're saying here. It's not that we can't live side by side with the Skrulls or the Zygon. It's that when a factor of the Zygon or the Skrulls wants to wipe out humanity or conquer humanity, then they'll, in whatever justification they have, whether we agree with it or not, when you want to wipe out a whole other species just to protect yourself, then that's the problem. And I think that's the problem that Nick Fury in the show is dealing with. It's not just that the Skrulls can't, it's that the Skrulls are now all of a sudden refusing to live side by side. And they've elected a radical leader that wants to see humanity wiped out. You know what I mean? How do you reason with that? How do you reason with someone that's going to be like, I'm just going to wipe you out. You're a problem. I don't like you anymore. I don't want to deal with it. I'm just going to exterminate you.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
I mean, now that we've stumbled upon it, it's fascinating how much this does parallel that Peter Capaldi Zygon 2-part episode.
Very much so.
Yeah. For those who haven't seen it, what he's talking about, there's a scene where the shape-shifting alien, the Zygon, looks exactly like the woman who's in charge of, I think it's Britain's nukes. They look just like each other. The doctor wipes each of their minds clean. They have no idea if both of them, they don't know if they're the Zygon or the human.
Yeah,
they both have a button that will completely wipe out the other one's race. So, if you're the humans, you completely wipe out the threat. They can't replace you. If you're the Zygons, you completely wipe out the humans. You now have your own planet and you get to have your culture live on. And it's one of those, what are you going to do? Because what if you're wrong? You completely wiped out your own race. And we're all really the same when it comes down to it.
Well, yeah, it was. Well, and he actually did that a little bit later. Oh, no, you're talking about the movie. Oh, you're talking about the movie. I was thinking about the key. No, never mind. No, let me interrupt. Continue.
I might be confused. I don't remember which was which.
Well, there's the anniversary with Tennant and Smith, and they also have a conversation. And Kate wants to blow up the world. Basically, wants to blow things up. And Kate Bishop, she's the head of. Oh gosh, the name just threw out. I had it like 2 seconds ago. Words sometimes disappear from my brain mid-sentence. Anyways,
same.
And then there's the button situation where you had a Zygon of Clara and Kate Bishop fighting over. So they're very similar, but they're two different things. So yeah, they're easy to get confused. But actually, going back to Deep Space Nine, they did the whole secret invasion in Deep Space Nine because, they had the Dominion, which was a race led by changelings, and the changelings were infiltrating Earth. And so they had this whole secret invasion thing. And actually, there was a Star Trek Next Generation episode at the end of season 1 where an alien race had infiltrated. So it's really cool to see that, not to segue into thing, but it's cool to see that this is kind of a interesting story point that's popped up in pop culture over the last 30 years.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. No, it's fascinating stuff. But when we're talking about identity, I want to go ahead and move on to our last of our 3 topics. To me, the big identity question in Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny is, who is Dr. Henry Jones Jr.? Who is Indiana? The way this movie ends, spoiler, we discover that the whole thing was really about him finding himself. And that's where I said there was this through line, right? So when I was talking about Strange New World Season 2, you have a lot of this, like, how does our past haunt us? Who are we? And how much does our memories affect us? We go to the Skrulls. What makes us different from the other? How do we identify ourselves? And then you get here with Indiana Jones wrestling with this question of who he really is. And what's interesting is Harrison Ford said before the movie came out, he's like, this movie's about age. And it took me a while to really figure out what he meant by that once I saw it, because I was like, it didn't have anything to do with him being old and frail or anything. And it's like, oh, no, it's, as you get older, you go through more crap. And as you get through more stuff, you have a tendency where you can lose yourself. And that's sort of where we see him at the beginning of this film. And I thought it was a really powerful film. I loved it. I'll go ahead and say, to me, this blew me away. In part because I was really afraid going into this movie. Had a lot of stuff I was afraid it was going to be that it wasn't. So that helped me out. But before anything else, Kevin, what is your history with Indiana Jones?
Well, similar thoughts as you about the new one. I did really enjoy it as well, and like, yeah, Indy's one grown up with for a long time. Because like, I mean, that's one of those franchises that kind of like crosses over between like nerd culture and then mainstream. Like, if that, like for instance, I mean, my dad was never a huge Star Wars fan or anything like that, but he always loved Indy, and so like, so I was introduced to the movies from a young age, and Last Crusade was always my favorite. Followed closely by Raiders. And then, yeah, similar to you, after Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, I was like, I don't know if they have the bandwidth to make another one. And I rewatched all four leading up to this one, so that was fun too to do them back to back because like I hadn't seen Kingdom of the Crystal Skull in a while, and like just to like do the whole series at once and going into this one. But yeah, I really was impressed by this one as well. Like I had both reservations and excitement because reservations just because like is this just a little too late? Are they just like trying to really milk this franchise? But I was excited because James Mangold is directing, who, if you don't know, he's had one hit after another. But he's done Logan, Ford versus Ferrari, Walk the Line. He's one of those filmmakers who doesn't have like a huge like prolific filmography. But he does like a movie every few years, and when he delivers, he delivers. And so when I saw his name, I was like, okay, I'm in. And then that first trailer really got me excited too. And so and I think because that's the thing with this one, I think it's more about something than I think that's probably like that's one of the problems with Crystal Skull was like it's entertaining for a good bit, but then the third act kind of falls apart, and beyond that, it doesn't really come away with like anything that meaningful. This one is very much like a commentary on the franchise without being too heavy-handed. It's a great send-off to Indy's story. And it is also very much captures the pulpy aesthetic of the original trilogy and says something new and like is able to inject a bit of tragedy. They're like, I don't know how, like, well, so Adam, you haven't seen the new one yet, have you?
It's been fully spoiled for me. Okay. So it's been fully spoiled for me, so don't worry about it.
Okay. So I will. So for spoiler alert, the way like and some like it's funny. I was talking with a friend the other night who actually is one of the ones who loves Crystal Skull, and he hated what they did with here in Dial Destiny, but in Dial Destiny, like and we started the movie and like after the flashback sequence, you know, like Josh, you were saying, like Indy's old, he's like gone through some stuff, and we learn about halfway through the movie that Mutt died in the character, the son who Shia LaBeouf played in Crystal Skull. He died in Vietnam, and then that put a huge strain on his marriage to Marianne, and she left him. And so he's at this point both like wanting to die, wanting to just like retire, and try to live out the days of his life. And I think like building off that is I think what make the ending so great. Because first off, I say a big highlight of the movie was Phoebe Waller-Bridge's character. She plays his goddaughter and is a great successor. Kind of like she's an archaeologist. She has like a lot of the same. She's almost like Brent pointed out. She's very much like Indy in Temple of Doom, where it still has all the skills, all the archaeological basis, but is a little more of like just in it for the power and glory. And I love that development it showcases. But at the end, they have both a great arc because again, I'm going spoilers here for people who haven't seen it, but they get to go back in time via the Dial of Destiny to ancient Rome. Basically, the villains are trying to get back to like the beginnings of World War II, and so that Mads Mikkelsen character can take over, and like instead of Hitler becoming finishing out as the Fuhrer, he can take over and help the Nazis win World War II. They end up instead in the Roman Empire, and but anyway, at the very end, after they defeat the bad guys and everything, Indy wants to stay there and remain and like live out the rest of his days there in ancient Rome, and just like, and he's already shot and he wants to just die there. He's like, and he says like to Phoebe Waller-Bridge that I spent my life, exploring history, chasing all that. I'm here now. Please let me go. And what I love the next moment that happens, because you think it might be because this is kind of the like, it's one of those like, oh, you could kind of see this as the ending. Like, I mean, that's been done before with like older characters. Like, there's like, let me die. But instead, Phoebe Waller-Bridge punches him and then forces and takes him on the airplane. I loved it because it's comedic, and it was also ends this way that's perfect ending because like this opens so many great character questions about who is he, what is his true purpose, and I love that she brings him back to the present. And at the very end, he has this like wonderful reconnection with Marion. That's not, I mean, it's like cheesy in the sense that it should be, but it's this great thing that ties them together. So it very much encapsulates everything about the title, like Dial of Destiny. This is like, okay, what has his life been all about? And I think like the message is more about not even his accomplishments and all this like action hero stuff, but more about the people that he invested in and like that they can still come together at the end. So I just really I thought it had a really emotional heartbeat to it. It was great action sequences. It's still, I mean, Last Crusade is still my favorite, but this one was really incredible, and I'm glad it's the last one and not Crystal Skull.
Yes. Yeah. Adam, you said you had a lot of history with Indiana Jones. You haven't seen this one yet, but what's your history with it?
No. Well, I grew up just like you guys. I grew up watching it on VHS and stuff when that was a thing, and of course, I saw Crystal Skull, and I wouldn't say I loved Crystal Skull, but I liked it. I liked it enough that I owned it and watched it since it's come out, kind of thing. And I think it did a really good job capturing the spirit of the Indiana Jones franchise. This big adventure. Some of it's a little wonky and a little cartoonish at points, but at the same time, I feel like there's parts of Temple of Doom that were a little wonky and a little cartoonish. So it wasn't too far beyond the thing. I definitely think I have criticisms of Crystal Skull, but for me, I liked the way it ended. Ending is so important to me. I think a good ending can make a bad show great, and a bad ending can make a good show awful. With anything, it's just like I think of my biggest example is the Mass Effect trilogy. If you've ever played that game, I was a huge Mass Effect fan. I loved the game. I loved the story arc, and I liked the third game. And at first, I was fine with the ending. I was okay with it, but over time, I became less and less okay with it. And the way they ended the series. Not necessarily, and so ending's really important to me, and I really think that the ending of Crystal Skull was perfect for Indy's character. I mean, you could argue that The Last Crusade was perfect for Indy's character, but at the end of the Crystal Skull, you have Indy getting married to this character that he obviously loved. There was obviously way more chemistry with him and Marion in the Temple of Doom than any of the other love interests he had. He got this family he didn't know he wanted. He got this happy ending he didn't know he wanted, and he gets to go off in the sunset. I love the whole scene of the hat falling off and Shia LaBeouf going to pick it up, and then he goes to put it on his head, and Indy steals it and puts it on his head like, no, he's the original. He's the only Indiana Jones. Puts it on his head, points his finger in a Harrison Ford way, and they walk. And I think that's my struggle about seeing Dial of Destiny is, I know this. I think the problem is I learned too much about what happened behind the scenes, and I learned too much about all the drama surrounding it. I think if I ignored it all and went into it with fresh eyes and didn't already know how the ending couple of minutes things and why the ending is the way it is, if I didn't know all those things, I think I would appreciate better. But really, for me, it's like Crystal Skull ended in a really good way, and I would rather not see Dial of Destiny and be disappointed, take that gamble, because ultimately at the end of the day, we decide how we want to view these stories. And just because, like, for the people that are really angry about to jump over to Star Wars, for the people that are really angry about, episode 7, 8, and 9, it's like, well, just because 7, 8, and 9 exist doesn't ruin 4, 5, and 6 for you. I mean, 4, 5, and 6 can still be a wonderful trilogy, even if you hate 7, 8, and 9, just because that story continued, and you didn't like the way that story goes. And I would argue that I didn't like it either. It doesn't change the fact that if you loved 4, 5, and 6, that it isn't still good. It's the same with Indiana Jones. If you love the first 3 movies but didn't like the last 2 movies, that doesn't mean the last 3 movies don't exist. It's just you kind of decide where you want to put the stopper in. And like, I'm kind of like, maybe down the road, I'll watch Indiana Jones. I might watch Dial of Destiny. But for now, it's like, I'm really happy with that 4th story arc and his character and how things. And I think my issue with Dial of Destiny as well is, I think they purposely did things just to be confrontational, and I didn't think they needed to do that. Like story wise, like there's really interesting story things they could have done that I think are better. But just because I think they could have done things better doesn't make it a bad movie. It just means, you know what I mean? Am I making sense now?
No, absolutely. I mean, I have that opinion a lot. I'm glad you said that about people that like say, "Oh, this ruined Star Wars for me. This ruined Indiana Jones." Blah blah blah. I'm like, I totally agree that just because it's technically canon, you can still enjoy the original trilogy that you love or whichever movies you did. It doesn't, to me, that doesn't ruin it for me. So I totally agree there. And yeah, and I mean, there are still things I would do differently with this. If I like, not that I'm anyway behind I would have any authority, but like, if I do think there should be some time shaved off on this movie. And the one thing I was like a little annoyed by, because it was this big like conclusion of the franchise and had a lot of callbacks, instead of, so there's one new character introduced like briefly, and then they quickly come off, but that Antonio Banderas plays. And Antonio Banderas is great, but I was really hoping when they're about to go to Morocco, and Indy's like, "Oh, I know a guy." I was so crossing my fingers that was going to be Short Round instead, especially with the Renaissance. And like, I was kind of disappointed that we didn't get a cameo from him, because like he could have been anywhere. Like, and Temple of Doom is probably like on the like one of my least favorite like indie movies. I don't like the movie as a whole, but I love Kiwi Khan and I love Short Round, and I think that would have been cool cap off to that story. But so there are like minor things I have there, but it's interesting, Adam, that you like the Indiana Crystal Skull a lot, because my thing with it, and why I think Phoebe Waller-Bridge's character was a much better like successor and like kind of apprentice to Indy, is like I think Child Love is a good performance, and there's nothing wrong with his character inherently, but he's not really an Indy successor. He's just kind of a hothead greaser. It's like, it's almost to me like if they had Jason Todd as like the only Robin and the successor to Batman, and not like the others, because like he's very much his own character. But Phoebe Waller-Bridges has much more in common with Indy, and is like that archaeological adventure. So I liked seeing that pair up, and that's why I like how this movie ended things better. But it does, nonetheless, though, Crystal Skull does have a very happy ending for it.
Well, and I never saw Shia LaBeouf's character as a successor. I think the whole like him going to put the hat on his head and Harrison Ford takes it is like, it's like, no, you're not my successor. I'm still Indy. And for me, I thought that was very Indiana Jonesy to not hand off that hat. Be like, no, right. So I never saw Shia LaBeouf's character as a successor. So it's not the successor thing that would bother me. I think it is a lot of the drama that surrounded it, all of the shenanigans and tomfooleries and the script rewrites. And, I always have hesitation when you hear, oh, there's been like 9 script rewrites and they've come back to reshoot 4 and 5 times. It's like, that doesn't bode well for me. And a huge pet peeve of mine, and this is if I had picked one thing that's bothered me, is when you introduce plot threads and don't resolve them. That's a huge frustration for me. And the fact that they have this whole murder plot thread, and he's being accused for, and maybe I'm wrong, for everything I've heard is they introduce this whole plot thread of him being accused of these murders, and then nothing comes of it. It just drops out.
Actually, very true. Until you said that, I didn't even think about, because the movie is pretty long, and like, that does happen like early, and then you kind of forget about it, because then they just go off and do action sequences.
It's a huge pet peeve to mine. It just shows.
Yeah,
it's one of those things. And maybe it's a little OCD of me, but it's one of those things like it's hard for me to get past. Like, it's like just resolve it. Just don't. It shows such lazy writing, and it just makes me think less of the overall production. And this is true of TV shows. This is true of. That's why I'm not a huge fan of J.J. Abrams' mystery box storytelling, because he introduces all these story threads and just lets them disappear. It drives me up the wall. It's just like, just come on.
Yeah. Well, I know we're already over time, but I had a little bit I wanted to say about the movie too, and had to do with some pushbacks on everything, because naturally. Just to give you an idea of my wrong opinions, Star Wars 8 is just one of my favorites. The Last Jedi was great.
I'll say
I know.
I love Last Jedi. I'm
Yeah.
cannot stand Rise of Skywalker. That's my 2 cents.
Same.
Yeah.
I didn't like
Temple
the
of
last
Doom-
two at all, so if that helps.
The Temple of Doom has been my favorite movie since I was like a young kid. I've always loved Temple of Doom. It's always been like just my absolute favorite thing. I even, when I was in college, I actually took Bible and archaeology because I was like, Indiana Jones, I could take an archaeology class,
And be called the next indie. Yeah.
Yeah, why not? And I really could not stand the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. I refused to watch it. Up until this year, I refused to acknowledge it as an Indiana Jones movie because to me it was just that bad. Until this year, when I was at Comic-Con, someone challenged me to watch it differently. Watch all the films, realizing that Indiana Jones films, one of the core tenets of what they are, is a critique of the movies of the time. So when you see the Last Crusade, it's a critique of buddy films. That's why it's him and his dad. And when you watch Indiana Jones 4, you have the terrible CGI. Of course, he's critiquing the CGI of the time. And I'm like, actually? Yeah. And it really redeemed that movie for me. So I'm glad that got to happen before this. And it really added a lot to how I watched this movie when I went to Dial of Destiny. Because, the de-aging stuff in the beginning, it bothered me a little bit. Not because it was bad, but because they still used old man Harrison Ford's voice with young man Harrison Ford. I was like, this is okay. That took me a second to get used to. And it was just kind of like, oh, what? And then I remembered, of course, they have to comment on the de-aging process. They have to do that. They have to do all these things. The convoluted time story. Of course, they had to do that. And I was like, okay, I get it. Also, for those wondering, the resolution to the he murdered thing fan, the only people accusing him of murder was the fake CIA people who were actually revealed to be Nazis and were killed. So all the people accusing him were dead. But I move on. The thing that really stood out to me in this film, other than, I know you mentioned her, she was fantastic, Phoebe Waller. And when I think of, like I mentioned earlier, I was really afraid of different stuff going into this film. One of the things that really, like, I was worried it was going to be, he's old and this new young female character, she's going to carry all the weight and we're going to prove that she's going to, and that wasn't the case at all. He had to save her a few times. She saved him too, but it was like they were very much equals. It wasn't like, he's this old frail man, And I didn't tell your message, tell your story, whatever, but Indiana Jones is precious to me. So I was really worried they were going to make this like an agenda film. And I kept going on waiting for them to like do a big reveal of like this agenda or that agenda and make it like something weird. And they never did any of that. So I was really relieved that they didn't like make it all about female power. They didn't make it all about any other agenda. They made it an Indiana Jones film. And that made me happy. Whenever you go through though, one of the things that really stood out, it bothered me at first, and I don't know if you guys caught it. Whenever you see Harrison Ford, it started doing the dun 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 dun, but it didn't do the whole thing. And then the next time we would do a little bit more of it, dun 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 dun. And it didn't do the full thing until the very end when he found himself. And I was like, oh man,
that's so cool.
I'm sorry, but John Williams is just phenomenal. The way he was able to tell that story just through the music of Indiana Jones slowly rediscovering himself, I was like, that's wow.
I knew there was something off about the music, like in that respect, and then now that you say that, I'm like, that makes perfect sense. Yeah,
and I was struggling with it because I was like, why they did it a little bit more. The one that I realized they did it slightly more was whenever like they were getting to the boats, and I was like, nothing significant happened right here. Like I was expecting to be shortstop or someone because they did more of the music. I was like, oh okay, and then I was like, nope, we're still not going to do the whole thing. And I was like, what are you waiting for? It wasn't till the credits rolled that they finally did the full like number. I was like, oh. And that just like the way that added to the story for me was so cool. I think my biggest complaint really, and this really weirdly enough comes from C.S. Lewis. C.S. Lewis always critiques how other people view people of the past as like dumb and whatever. And they're like, no, if you pay attention, when people of the past talk about the dragons, they're talking about it really specifically. They didn't see some metal plane and think, yeah, there was 91 scales. Its eyes look like, like that's not what happened. But you know what? I can overlook that. I had a really good time with the film. I'm glad we got to see Indiana be Indiana.
Yeah.
Even though I like Kingdom of the Crystal Skull now that I kind of get it a little bit more and gave it another chance, it still was my least favorite. And just to have this to me was just a higher note to end on, especially because like you mentioned, they have where Mutt died. They showed the divorce papers with him and Marion, and I kept waiting for the pin to drop, and you get to the end, and she's there because, like you mentioned, Phoebe's character Helena, knocked him out, drug him back, told everybody he's back. She says you're back. Are you really back? And you have that where they recreate the scene from Raiders of the Lost Ark. It's like, where does it not hurt? Because, they're older now. It's like, here, where does... Yeah. And that scene, that was so cool. I was like, man, I got the goosebumps. I was like, this is Indiana. This is how I needed to see him. Gave me closure in a fantastic way.
Yep.
Even their love story has always been something great to me. And I'm glad I revisited the part of their story that was in Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, because I feel like that really added to it once I, got over myself. And just kind of seeing that relationship played out, his story really kind of wrapped up. And then the way they introduced Phoebe Waller, I really hope they do more with that character. Yeah. And the finishing touch for me, why I'm glad I saw it in theater. Credits were rolling. Parents took their kids to this movie, and I got to overhear a few kids talking about it, right? And, they're talking about, oh, this was the coolest thing ever. One parent's like, oh, is that your favorite movie now? And then I hear one kid go, Mom, I don't think Helena has cooties. I about died. I was like, kid's first crush. Nah, that's how you do
it. That's awesome.
It was pretty funny. It was a good time. And just getting to see, of course, you go through a loss of your son. Yeah, you lose a part of yourself. For those who followed a long time, I've gone through a terrible accident, and it's hard to find yourself sometimes. I think we all go through stuff, and just kind of having that play such an important part of this movie, part of these shows that we talked about today. I think it's just a really powerful thing. Did you guys have any other final comments either on this movie or just the idea in general of what it means to find yourself and know who you are? I would say in Christ, but I guess not everybody listens to Christian. So what to you guys, what does it mean to really find yourself?
I was going to say, it's been really interesting to see this theme in particular play across in multiverse stuff. Across the Spider-Verse, I could just go on and on about how brilliantly that encapsulates the idea. Oh my gosh, the idea of is this the tragedy that makes Spider-Man, partly who is that necessary? And it just delves into that so much. And I know that's not really answering the question, but no, it's just looking at, I think, all the facets that make us who we are so important. And and I with Dial of Destiny, it showcases the good and the bad, the tragedy he has to go through to kind of rediscover himself, but also the joy he finds in, being Indiana Jones and discovering. And I think, I think because after Mutt died, he didn't think he could be kind of a father figure again, and he gets to rediscover that. So it's all those elements that come into play. And I think that can apply to our own lives, is just looking at the different facets, both spiritually and experience wise, that make us who we are, that are all really important.
Yeah, absolutely. Adam, do you have anything you wanted to add just to the theme in general? Or?
Well, and it's such a, and I know you said that not everyone's a Christian, but, I think, so I might get just a tad on the preachy side. I apologize ahead of time. But I think it's such a testament to God's creation that we've been wrestling with this question of who we are, what are our identities, what are we in this big grand universe since the entire history. If you look at entertainment, the medium of that visual medium of entertainment, where it may be stage, may it be comic books, answering that question. It goes all the way back to Oedipus Rex, which was a Greek play, the Greek tragedy of Oedipus Rex. That argument of who is this? He's a king that inherits a kingdom and kills the king and inherits the kingdom and lives this life out only to as he's trying to run away from a prophecy saying that he would kill his dad and sleep with his mom, and only to discover that he did exactly that. And, so we've been struggling with this question our entire existence. And I believe as I get older, as I look at the universe and as I look at the human condition, I'm more and more convinced that we can only find those answers in God and only find those answers in the Bible. And it makes me sad because, we look at these wonderful stories and we're just you look at the world, our country now more than ever is asking this question, who we are and what is identity and what does it mean? And, we turn to this entertainment for answers, and really we need to be turning to God. And I think it is some really cool, it's really cool to sit and analyze, the truth that the world actually stumbles upon in searching for truth. And then it's interesting to see what the world stumbles upon and then rejects. And there's a whole conversation that could be had. But, I think for like me, I have struggled with my identity for so much in life. I struggled with a little bit of gender dysphoria in my youth, and I struggled with, what does it mean after a troubling childhood, and who am I as a father, who am I as a husband, and I think it's such an important question. I think my encouragement to anyone out there listening to try to see what your identity looks like through the gospel, and see how that makes you feel, and see how that maybe turns your brain around.
Yeah, I mean, identity crisis, gender dysmorphia, even when we're thinking of dissociative identity order. I mean, there's a lot of things on like real mental issues that psychologists are probably good for, but I think there's deeper than that. There are these, like, everybody struggles with the basic thing of like, who are you? What is your purpose in the universe and all that thing? And that's where I think a lot of people turn to religion. I am one of those, obviously. And I think it's a good thing. I think it's a good thing to really wonder who you are, what is your purpose here and all that. C.S. Lewis writes my favorite book, The Four Loves. And ultimately he comes to all loves fail in light of God's love. And God's love is really the purpose of all of this whole mess. But one of the chapters, he talks about friendship, and how when you lose somebody, you don't just lose that person, but you lose that person's part in someone else. So for those of you who like have a grandparent, like, there's some parts of your cousin, some part of your parents that really only come alive around that person. When they're gone, that part of those other people who are still here is also gone. So I think when we think of identity, you always have to turn to like, what part of you is bringing that alive in other people, that love alive in other people, that parts of other people too. Or like, are you bringing the best out of other people or the worst? If a scroll were to imitate you, would it suddenly have new values and purpose and not be able to be evil anymore? Or would it still be a scroll, I'm being a little goofy, but I still feel like it's a good question to ask, good things to ponder. With that, though, we are going to go ahead and start doing our wrap up here. And for our What's News, rather than just kind of doing our usual, like, what do you recommend? We want to pick one of these three. If you just had to recommend one of these three, if someone hasn't seen any of them, what do you think they should absolutely stop and go see? Honestly, it's hard for me not to say Strange New Worlds. I love that series, but I love Indiana Jones. Indiana Jones is always just at the heart of who I am. Talking about identity, some part of me is made alive when Indiana Jones is on the screen. So I'm going to have to go Dial of Destiny. It's going to be my pick of these three. Kevin, if you had to recommend one, I know you haven't seen them all, but
but I second Dial of Destiny even there. And part of it too is just like, I love streaming and stuff, but I'm always a big proponent of the big screen theatrical experience. And I love that. You told that story about the family that went. I think this is a great one. Take your family too, and it's a great, like, I can imagine the awe and wonder that like kids would experience watching this on the big screen. So definitely go see it while it's in theaters.
Yeah. And Adam, you had anything you wanted to add? Like those three,
definitely Secret Invasion. I'm a big fan of that. I haven't realized, and I don't think I realized till now how much I'm into superheroes more than other things. It just kind of occurred to me. It's like,
I get that.
I'm really more into superheroes more than a lot of other things. So I really enjoy Secret Invasion. I think they're all criticisms, but I think if you just kind of step back and enjoy the ride, I think it's really cool.
Nice. Well, we did one comment I wanted to show from Facebook. This is on YouTube. Someone watching live. This was Christian, one of our hosts. He's just finished recording another episode, but he said, as far as the question, I've always understood it best by realizing who God is first before I focus on me. After complaining about the 200 limit, he says, after focusing on who God is, I then ask, who did he make me to be? And what can I do about that? I think
he's 100% right.
Yeah, that's just right to the heart of the question that we're asking here. Guys, let us know what you think. how you wrestle with these questions. What do you think, like from the Bible or from these shows? Or if you were like, man, y'all are just wrong about one of these, like, man, that Strange New World's just stupid, Josh. Let me know. Drop it in the comments. Of course, hit the like button, subscribe, get notifications when we release new stuff. We appreciate all of your time. Thank you guys for joining me. And remember, we're all the chosen people, a geekdom of priest. This was an Anazao Ministries podcast. If you enjoyed this show and would like to learn more about our network, be sure to check out the Anazao Ministries podcast network.